Alright, welcome back to another video. So it's getting to be that time of year. It's getting cold again. And I've got one more thing that I want to do to my Pioneer 700. If you followed along in my other videos, you've already seen me install a stereo system and some lights and this whole sub-electrical system in here. And the last thing I want to do is install a heater in the cab of the Pioneer. There's some options, aftermarket options available. You can go with the OEM Honda Pioneer setup, which is quite expensive, and it usually requires that you install the Honda accessory electrical setup, which basically replaces this area here with an electrical panel with switches, and one of them is for the heater. I already installed a bunch of electrical stuff. I actually wouldn't need that. There's other aftermarket options starting in price around $400 on up. One issue that we're going to have installing any kind of heater in Pioneer 700 is that there's no flat areas on the dash with access below them that will allow us to have defroster vents for the windshield. So something to keep in mind. Some of the aftermarket options, one of the most popular ones, has a couple vents that go here, and you can aim them up at the window and they can act like defroster vents. Obviously that won't work for any of us who have used this space for something else, so it's really not a very good design. But I guess if you had nothing else, it would work. So I needed to adapt and customize a system that will work with the modifications that I've already made to my Pioneer. And I suspect a lot of you out there either are in the same situation or you want something a little bit more budget friendly that still works well. So what I've done is design my own custom setup. Another consideration that I had to take into account is my space under the hood. So with the deluxe model, we have this power steering motor right here, which takes up a ton of space under here. And then I put all my electrical stuff right here in this area. I got wiring harnesses hanging down there. So it left me with a lot less space right here. Many of the aftermarket heaters, they mount right here and they go right to this area here. So I had to minimum relocate this electric box and possibly this relay here to install one of those aftermarket setups. And the vents, run from there. Another thing I considered was one of the heaters that mounts on the floor or under the dash. So we have some space. If you take up a little bit of leg room for the passenger, we could have mounted a heater on the inside here that's got the heat exchanger and the fan built in here. They're loud and they take up a lot of space, and it's not the best looking solution. So I kind of came up with my own design, and the best part is all of it will cost around $200 total. So for half the cost of the cheapest aftermarket setup you can buy, I was able to get a custom setup that will work. All right, so the first thing, the main part of the heater, just like any aftermarket setup, we have a blower, we have coolant lines coming into a heat exchanger, and we have our outlets right here. So this is considered a marine heater made by Meridyne. There's the part number right there. Okay. This company here makes a lot of the aftermarket heaters that you will buy. So instead of going through the middleman who put just a bare amount of research and development into their project, we can spend half the amount of money and come up with something pretty easily ourselves. So we've got 3 2-inch outlets on here. So this, when it's installed, will basically sit on this cross arm here. Then we'll have to custom make some brackets to bolt it to the sides. Okay, so that will basically sit right there. Another big consideration for your underhood space is how tall the heater is. As you can see, this clears no problem. when we have that sitting there, that's a big issue. Most of them, like if you try to buy one of the Jegs or the Summit, you know, universal type hot rod heaters, that basically looks like this. It has 4 outlets. They are taller. They will not clear down on this end here your hood. So something to keep in mind. So see, when this is mounted like this, I will be able to have my coolant lines running out, down, back to the engine, and there'll be just enough space hopefully to get my heater hoses tucked in here and ran where they need to go. So that brings me to the next design consideration. Is this has 3 outlets. So how are we going to utilize 3 outlets? Well, I don't really know exactly until I get into it, but here's my plan. I plan to have the middle one come out, and this is going to go to the floor heat. What I will do is I bought some 1 1/4 pipe tees from Home Depot. I'll show you those here in a minute in the project. And I'm going to split that and have dual outlets for the floor, as long as I have space. And then each one of these will be for a dash vent. So that brings me to the next piece of the puzzle here. I ordered this kit here also from Aerodyne. It comes with some expandable 2-inch heater hose. And each kit comes with 2 of these little vents here. So I need a total of 2 of these kits. I personally got these from Summit. You can get them in multiple different places. It is designed to adapt to a different type of Aerodyne heater, but it will also work in our case. You know, when you think about it, it's pretty simple. All right, so we'll also need various stainless hose clamps. We're gonna need quite a bit of 5/8 heater hose. I bought this in bulk. I bought 50 feet of it. Obviously you don't need 50 feet of it, but I can cut off however much I need. What we're going to be looking for, how we're going to make our connections. A lot of the earlier heaters, even the Honda OEM one, teed into the radiator hoses, which was a bad idea, and it never really worked well. So the better thing to do is to tee into the oil cooler here. And how it works is it comes out of the engine or flows this way. We're going to take this line here and we're going to completely remove it, and then we'll come out of the engine, go to the heater core, and then there'll be another line that comes back to here. So instead of it going through this pipe here, it will make a loop up through our heater, and that will provide our hot coolant for our heat. All right, so like I said, you'll need some various clamps, hoses, coolant. Here's the switch I'm going to be using. So when it's in the middle, it's off. It'll be low or high, whichever way. Real simple to wire that. Have power in, and then your low and your high circuit, which matches up to the wires here. We've got our black, which is our ground, and our low and high wire. They also make switches like this. These just work by turning them like a knob. The problem with this is it's not really waterproof. You'd have to drill another hole in your dash. Like I said, I'm going to be utilizing the switch port that I'm not using for the lights. I'm going to go ahead and utilize that. And that should give me a nice OEM looking installation once it's all completed. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and drill the first hole right here in the dash. And be careful. You probably want to mark these holes first, that way make sure that you have the same amount of distance on each one. Now I'm thinking maybe I can get a floor vent, maybe one up here, so above the pedals, and then on this side, put one over here, and aim it that way. And I'll still use my little T. It'll come up to the middle here. That way there's a little more control over whose feet are getting warm and whose feet aren't. All right, so I'm getting the switch put in. Got it pressed into place. There's 4 contacts total. So the middle one is our power in, and then this is, we'll say high on the top and low on the bottom, out. And then this 4th contact is a negative. That way it will light up when the switch is pressed in either direction. It's just for the LED. So there's negative. I have this extra wire here, which is for my parking lights, because the other switches are illuminated when the parking lights are on, or the headlights. This switch does not have that functionality, so I'm just going to tape this off and tie it up into the wiring harness. I'm going to run a separate circuit for my heater. I still have room in my fuse block, so I'll just run a wire down into there, and it will be for the input, and then we'll have my 2 output wires that actually run to the heater itself. All right, so I probably should have saved this one for last because it's probably the easiest, but I just went ahead and popped my vent through, so you have to push them through first. So there's the first vent, it's pushed through. And I cut a length of this hose, had to reach my hand up in here and work it on. Then I used a zip tie. I started the zip tie, then placed it around the hose and slid it up there and then pulled it tight. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of working room. Like I said, this is probably the easiest one. Well, maybe the ones on the floor will be easier, but this side over here is gonna be a little bit trickier. I'm gonna try to do that next. Okay, so I've got both vents hooked up here. And this one was a real pain because there's really no room to work. I had pushed my arm up under the dash here and try to work this on to the back of the dash register there. So getting this slid on there is kind of a pain. It's kind of like trying to put a dryer vent on a dryer, but you kind of have to like use the tip of your fingers and, you know, like pull it over. Then you put a zip tie, start it down here, put the zip tie so it's a little loose, and then slide it up the hose. In this case, I went down and under and up to the dash. So I've got my 2 dash vents connected. Now I'm going to go ahead and run the coolant line. So obviously we're going to have 2 lines. They're going to run down here, and they kind of got to run with the radiator coolant hoses, kind of the same route back to the engine compartment. All right, I've got 2 pieces of 5/8 inch hose. Each one I cut to about 85 inches, which should give me a little extra room to play with. So 85 inches. I'm going to take a marker and mark I for inlet and O for outlet on each end of each hose. That way I can keep them straight. And then I'm going to work on snaking these down and under the side-by-side. And I'll try to zip tie it up along the other hose, the radiator hoses that go back to the engine compartment. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is actually go down just in front of the fan here. I'll go over here with these 2 hoses once I get them marked. And then as we get it down underneath, we will need to, you'll see the radiator hoses go to hardline. We'll need to snake these 2 hoses back under there above the guard and get them pushed all the way to the back. And you can kind of lay down under the side-by-side and help them along to get them back there. Or you can start the engine compartment and work forward. Either way will work. Just whatever works best in your situation. All right, excuse the mess. So we've got the hoses run, and they run through this little channel here, as you can see. And I've got them run up, and they're gonna be zip tied off. Put a little bit of plastic wire loom around those as well, where they kind of rub. That way, you know, over the years they don't get rubbed through. And I've got them coming up right here, so they'll be ready to hook into our heater however they need to go. You can see. So we've got plenty of hose here to work with. So the one that says I on it, which is this one, we will connect, basically it's to the output of the oil cooler here. And the one that says O will connect into the head, and we'll do away with this cross pipe here. So hopefully that makes sense. The coolant actually flows back through this way, you know, from the factory. So it's after the coolant goes to the oil cooler, then it jumps into our inlet line, goes to the front, goes through our heater, and then it comes back here, and then goes into the head. So that's the route it will be taking. So I'm going to put a pan underneath to catch any coolant, because when I take these clamps off here, there will be coolant that spills out. So just keep that in mind. Alright, so I've got my hoses connected here, and as long as you are quick about it, you will lose very minimal amount of coolant. And we literally lost hardly any coolant, so that's good. Speaking of coolant, the Honda HP Motorsports coolant, it's just type 2. It's just regular old Honda coolant. So you can, if you have maybe a Honda vehicle like I do, it's the same stuff here as this. Usually comes in quarts when you're buying it for the smaller vehicles like this, but this is the same thing. It's type 2 Honda antifreeze. So that's what we'll use to top it off when it comes time to do that. So for now, what we'll do is I'm gonna go ahead and make my other hose connections, and be ready to get things set in place. Before I connect these, what I'll do is I will cut them to where I think they need to be. Then I will fill both of these hoses with coolant to take up a lot of the air space. We don't want a bunch of air circulating through the system. So we're going to get as much out as we can now. So we will top that off, and then we'll check our radiator, see if the level in the radiator has gone down, and we'll top that off as well. After we run the machine for a while, get most of the air through, we'll again check the radiator once it cools down and top it off as needed. Alright, so now I'm starting the bottom vents for the floor heat. I've got the first one installed right here. I'll show you what that looks like on the inside. I did step up to a 2 1/8 inch bit. So you can see it's right above the pedals. Should be nice, so it'll come down right on your feet. Because the 2-inch bit, it was almost too tight of a fit for these two vents. It took quite a bit of work just to get them to snap into place. So again, I went up to a 2 1/8 inch, and this snapped right in perfectly. And it's definitely not too loose. So use a 2 1/8 if you got it. Hole saw seems to work better. So for my second floor vent, I'm going to put it down in this region down here. What that will look like is basically right in this area here under the glove box. That way, again, it can be on your passenger's feet. Here's our little vent. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Here's how I'm going to join them. This is a 1 1/4 inch PVC T, and it will fit over that nicely. And then what I'll use to secure this is, I don't really trust zip ties in this instance. So I'm going to use just a stainless steel hose clamp to clamp it on there. I think that'll work a little bit better in this case. And I'm just going to tuck this T down here where it's out of the way, run it to each side, and then the third leg will come up to the middle. All right, so with both lower vents secured, here's where we're at. You can see how this T comes into play here. So this one goes up under here. That one goes over to the lower vent. Now this will be ready to come right into the middle. This will come to the left. Then we've got our other dash vent that will come to the right. So I'm just going to run a wire for my new circuit here. Just like I said, you either need to add an accessory circuit. I mentioned this earlier in the video. You can run a line directly from the battery. Make sure it's fused up here. You can have it so the heater will run all the time when it's off. That's why I put in this relay. That way it would kill everything when I turn the key off. So all this relay does is switch on this fuse panel, and then everything's fused separately after that. There is a large fuse that this is fused individually back at the battery. And I showed that in my other video. This is just a ground line here that we're going to use for the heater that I've got coming off a ground lug that everything's grounded to on the frame here. So I've already added another fuse here. I'm going to use a 15 amp fuse. It says on high that the blower will use approximately 9.7, so about 10 amps. You got to figure in like a startup surge, so I'm going to just round up to a 15 amp fuse. And when the key is on, this will be energized, so I'll run a new wire up to our switch. So I just painted these. These are just some 90-degree brackets I picked up at Home Depot, and they were unpainted. So I've spray painted them black, drilled a couple of holes, or enlarged the holes that were already there. There are some holes on the side of the unit right here. You can see they're pre-threaded. It does not appear to have come with screws for those, so I'll just find some screws that fit that hole. The one thing you just need to be careful of is don't use a big screw. Obviously you have a aluminum water jacket inside of here. You need to be very mindful of where that's at and use a shallow screw in these holes. You don't want to cause a leak right off the rip. And that will be bolted to the side, and then I'll just bolt it down. Just use some self-tappers right into the metal frame there to hold the heater in place. Obviously want it secured really well because, you know, we take this thing off-road. Sees a lot of bumping, so we want to make sure it's not going to put a lot of stress on it and break the brackets. So I've got my wire run up for that heater circuit. Got my last hose connected here. So now we are actually ready to set the heater box in place and try to get these hoses connected. So the one thing you want to keep in mind is that when you're running these hoses, you need to be mindful of your gear shift lever and your four-wheel drive lever. They're actually moving parts up inside of here that move. So you need to stay away from them. That way nothing gets caught on them. So none of my hoses are even near those areas, so we shouldn't have any problems. All right, so got my wire ran up here. I'm just making my final connections. Just a few things for you to know. The orange wire is the high speed. The yellow wire is the low speed. As far as the switch is concerned, it's the opposite of how you would think. So if you push the switch up like this, it energizes this bottom terminal. So we want to wire our orange wire to this. It's high. And when we put it on low, the yellow one goes to this terminal. That's low. So let me get that done. All right, got it all back together. Good. Turn the key, put it on low. Now, that moves a ton of air. In fact, I don't think low is going to be low enough, to tell you the truth. We have to be closing off vents. And there's high. And that really moves the air. Alright, so it's time to finish this up. On these little 9-inch heaters, there actually is no bias for which hose is connected to which, so this actually doesn't matter. You can hook them up either way. There's no inlet outlet. On the larger 16-inch heaters that Meradyne offers, it does matter which way you hook it up. So we're just going to hook them up whichever way they fit good. I'll take a few measurements here, cut this off. The main thing you want to avoid is any kinks in the hoses. So I have these carefully routed so they come up and make slow sweeping turns. If you put a sharp kink in the hose, you'll probably bend it off and you'll have poor coolant flow and it'll cause a bunch of other problems. So the first thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to get the brackets hooked onto the side here. Okay, so I've got My bracket's screwed on here. What I did is I took a small bolt that I had that threaded perfectly into the hole in the side of the heater case. Then I used, like I said, a self-tapping stainless sheet metal screw into the frame. So this is very solid in here. And I went ahead and connected my hoses. I filled them the best I could without them spilling out everywhere. It is, you know, you got to be careful with the orientation here so you don't pinch these off, like I said. You can see they go on there. One thing to note, I did not realize, I would say that these outlets on this heater are actually 3/4 inch. This is 5/8 hose, so it is a super tight fit. So there's a couple ways you can go about this. I still recommend using the 5/8 inch hose, especially the way it mates to the Honda connections back there. You don't want to adapt it and go bigger. So you really just need to either heat up the hose a little bit so it stretches easier, or what I did is I put a little bit of, I used some of my fluid film because I know it wouldn't hurt the hose. Just put a little bit of that and got these pushed on there. It took a little bit of fighting. Now I've got these tightened down, so we're nice and tight there. So everything should be good to go. All I need to do now is I'm going to check my coolant level. I'm going to go ahead and top this off before I start the vehicle, and then I will start it up, let it run, try to get this thing up to operating temperature, get it through there. If normally with a car, I would start it and let it run with the radiator cap off. May try that on this just to immediately burp some air out of the system. I don't know how much pressure is going to be in here when it's just idling. Probably not much, like a car, so it should be okay. So I'll give that a shot after I get it topped off. All right, so you also remember, just like cars, these do have coolant recovery tanks down here, right here on the left side. So if I look underneath, you can actually see the level in the tank. So it will pull coolant out of the tank itself while it's running. So we'll just keep this thing. We'll be able to add coolant to that. And it usually only when it cools down does it actually pull the coolant in. It'll burp it out when it's hot. But like I said, we want to go ahead and top off the radiator first. All right, so I'll say this. While it's warming up, keep checking the hoses, see if they're getting hot. They should get hot before the thermostat opens. Also, periodically check your temperature gauge just to make sure there's no overheating going on. If there's like a large air bubble trapped or something, rev it up a little bit. I've got the tail end of the thing sitting outside. Obviously, we don't want carbon monoxide poisoning. We just came up a notch. Just trying to heat it up and burp the air through the system. Let me not forget to state the obvious, that we also need to check for leaks everywhere that we make connections. Everything's good. I am starting to feel a little bit of heat on this hose here. Alright, so let it run for a little bit, warm up. These things take a while to warm up anyway, so it's not going to be a short trip heater, I'll tell you that. But anyway, just give you a little bit of scientific testing here. The air temperature outside right now is about 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. I'm going to turn the heater on low. That's starting to make heat. As you can see, 95, 96. It's not extremely warm, but when it's 30 degrees outside, putting out 96 degree heat feels pretty good. So we're up to 100, 110 degrees. So it's working pretty good. I'm impressed with it. If you had a sealed up cab, like if I had some doors on here, it'd probably already be getting way too hot in here. I'm just sitting out here in the open air, and it's actually comfortable if you have this on you. The key thing is keeping my feet nice and warm, which is nice. Again, It's not extremely hot, but I think if we ran it some more and we get the coolant top off, it'll work pretty well. All right, so I went out and ran it pretty hard, and the radiator hose never even got hot. The heater, these are nice and hot, is basically doing all the cooling that the side-by-side needs to keep the engine running cool. The thermostat never even opened. So, yeah, ice cold radiator. All right, so interesting. So, for around $200, we custom made our own heater that works just as good as any aftermarket kit you can buy. I mean, it's the exact same thing, basically. So, hopefully the video was helpful for you. I know I didn't show every little step, but I think it gave you a good idea if you're going to try to tackle this project yourself, and you either don't want to spend the money, or you're in a kind of a situation like me, where you've got some other custom accessories that aren't going to let you install it. I'm not going to spend all that money just to have to not do what they want you to do in the kit. So maybe this helped you out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Subscribe, and in the description for the video, I'll have a list of the parts that I used to build this kit, in case that's helpful to you. Until next time, we'll see you later.